You know a lot about dowsing. You know, their thought is, oh, the world's not what I thought it was. And Dr. Jude Currivan is now talking about this amazing process of which I'm a part. What would you say to them now? What's their next step? What should they do?
This is a science of love because it shows us that we are all not just interconnected, we are all ultimately one. And that unity of consciousness underpins and frames and grounds us in this meaningful, purposeful universe and cosmos, and our purpose and meaning and role in it.
Right, so two-dimensional boundary of the universe basically is I won't use the word, I want to use the word is responsible for, but I don't mean it like that. But the two-dimensional boundary of the universe is creating all form within it, in all levels,
Yeah.
of what we talked about before, from the tiniest to itself.
Absolutely.
The universe, our universe, everything that we perceive and can see, and beyond the seeable universe, as far as astronomers are concerned, is the universe, but not the cosmos itself, in your sense. Is that right?
No, and I think what we need to do is we need to just take a step back, because what we're also now realizing, there's been this big sort of, I think, misperception and confusion with a lot of folks for quite some time about the viewable universe and the idea that it just continues.
Yeah.
And what we now know is from, first of all, from measurements, again, of the cosmic microwave background, they're finite. The wavelengths in them are finite. And interestingly enough, at the beginning of the 20th century, it was something like looking at a hot oven.
Yeah.
That caused the quantum revolution. Because if you look at a hot oven, you look at the radiation from it, the old paradigm said it should be infinite, and then it clearly isn't.
Right.
And because it isn't, people like Max Planck and Albert Einstein realized that energy, and then it got expanded to energy matter, is quantized. And the word quantum means packet. So it wasn't a continuous, infinite spread, it was packeted in quanta as quanta. And so whenever we get a finite phenomenon, it can only emerge in a finite system. Yeah. So the fact that the temperature and the wavelengths of the temperatures within the cosmic microwave background, they have a spectrum, but they are finite in extent, is again a fundamental clue that we are in a finite universe. There are many other pieces of evidence for this, one of which is that the hydrogen that creates stars is coming to its end. You know, we've had this burst of star formations 9 billion years ago, but about 5 billion years ago, the rate of stellar formation started to reduce, and it's continued to reduce. There just isn't any hydrogen left freely to create stars. But the biggest thing, apart from finite in a finite universe, is that our universe began 13.8 billion years ago, as I mentioned, not in a minute sense, but not as a chaotic Big Bang, but as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And when we add that to the other evidence we have, we realized that space expanding and time flowing represents the embodiment of that big breath. Yeah. And the point is that this enables our universe not only to exist, but to evolve, because as space continues to expand and time to flow, so the holographic boundary of space-time expands with ever more information, meaningful information, then being able to be projected as the experiential appearance, the evolutionary impulse of our universe. But the point is, in terms of its finiteness, is that there's a fifth measure of Planck's scale. There's energy, temperature, space, and time, which we've talked about. But the fifth measure is temperature. And our universe began in its hottest state, called the Planck temperature. And it's vastly hotter than any star could ever be. Yeah? Trillions and trillions of times hotter than the 1,000,000 degree temperature that is part of our sun's, environment and core. But because it began at that very high temperature and that very lowest, what's called entropy, and we're now re-establishing entropy not as order to disorder or even energy states, but as informational content of a system.
Okay.
So at the very beginning, our universe, like a newborn baby, had all that it needed to then grow into an adult, but at its lowest information content. But at the highest temperatures meant, and in laws of physics, in a closed system, the two are inversely proportional. So as space expanded, temperature dropped, but as space expanded too, more and more information content was included in it. So we're at a point now in our life cycle of our universe where the temperature is only about 2.7 degrees above absolute zero, and it can't go beyond absolute zero.
Right.
So what we are is very far into this cycle where ever since the first moment of Big Breath, more and more and more information has been experienced, embodied, evolved within our universe. But as it does so, space has expanded. We're now at a point where the temperature, and it's the temperature difference,
Right,
that actually enables still a potential for more informational content to be embodied, which is why through our life cycles, we have a temperature differential that enables energy to flow through us and therefore information to flow through us. When we come to the end of our life cycle, our temperature, all of our electromagnetism, all of our informational flows stop in our bodies, and our temperature then becomes the same as the ambient temperature of our planetary home Gaia. The same is happening throughout the entire universe.
right, okay. And that's that. Okay. Okay.
The beauty of it is, it's a coherent picture. All the evidence supports this.
Yeah.
All the laws of physics, when we understand them, and we're not saying quantum physics and relativity physics are wrong. We're saying just like Newtonian physics before them, they're incomplete.
Yeah.
And the pioneers themselves realized that consciousness is primary, but it was pushed to the side. So we're now bringing not just it in as primary, but as all pervasive.
Yeah.
And that literally is a game changer. And when we understand that consciousness expresses itself as meaningful information, and we've now got the holographic principle to bring in, we've got these other, understandings that take on thermodynamics to what I call infodynamics. It's like it literally is the most beautiful recipe for a perfect universe.
Okay. So just to make it clear for people watching this, then what you're really saying there is actually, as the greats of quantum science made their discoveries, that many of those early pioneers of the quantum field, the quantum theories at the time, they were prepared to accept the underlying foundation of consciousness as being where things arose from. But what happened was that actually materialist science took over and took everybody, okay, we're going down this way, let's pull this apart and see how this works, because it must be like a clockwork mechanism, and consciousness must arise from this matter.
Exactly. And it's nonsense, it's preposterous. And preposterous is a word that's based on the Latin that means back to front. So it literally is back to front. And of course, yes, indeed, people like Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Owen Schrödinger, others absolutely understood this deeper perspective. But at the time, they didn't have the evidence.
Yeah.
And they didn't also have the concepts.
Yes.
I mean, holography was only
Yeah, of course.
discovered, it wasn't invented, it was discovered by Denis Gabor, after the Second World War. Einstein was bringing forward his understanding before even the neutron was discovered in an
Right.
atom. So, it's taken almost a century. And back in the 80s, 1980s, a scientist called David Bohm was realizing a whole next step of that journey. But again, David, this is 30 years ago, David did not have the understanding really of what I've just shared, nor the evidence. But again, he could see it. He knew that this whole process that he called the implicate order to the explicate order, he was again another pioneer along this journey that's ongoing, of course, but to this point where we can, bring it all together, still in a work in progress, but in a time perhaps that is pivotal for the human race, and a time that may be pivotal, and a way of understanding that hopefully can help us heal the trauma of our perceived separation and help ground us into a much more empowering, inspiring, and truthful, a truly authentic perspective of our world and our role in it, our way in it.
I've got so many questions. I'm just trying I'll try and stay on a line that kind of follows logically for other people as well, because obviously sometimes my thoughts are not logically sprung from what you're saying. One thing I do want to go back to, I just want to take you off that a second. We're going to come back to that non-material and material perspective, but I just wanted to go back to when you were talking about everything basically being based on fractals, on patterns, on repeating patterns of scale and repeating patterns of information. That applies equally, and you did say it, I believe, that actually that equally those fractal patterns apply to behaviors of cultures, for example.
Absolutely.
So it literally is fractal patterns. The mathematics of the universe are predictable. Human emotions and expression on events in history are predictable in that sense, do you think?
I think there's a slippery slope from predictability to determinism.
Right.
And I don't want to go down that slippery slope because I think it's an incorrect perspective.
Okay, fine.
What we're saying is that everything is mind and consciousness at play. And so when we look at an ecosystem, we find the same underlying what are called attractors as underlie the internet. Yeah. When we look at, for example, there's something called a power law, which crosses many, many, many phenomena. It's part of these same relational patterns that pervade the universe. But for example, there's a power law, basically looks at the relationship between the frequency of an event and its strength, its power. So a very well-known one is a power law of earthquakes.
Right.
And when we look at the frequency of earthquakes and the power, which is often called the Richter scale, we see not a sort of a curve that suggests there's an average earthquake, but arrayed along a line which shows that there is a common relationship between frequency and power that applies to virtually all earthquakes. So what that says is an earthquake that is twice the power on the Richter scale, which is a logarithm power, is 4 times less likely to happen. Okay. Now, at the end of the Second World War, and more subsequently, following the sort of the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, researchers have looked at conflicts, human conflicts, and their frequency and their power in terms of the number of fatalities. And what they found is exactly the same power law that describes earthquakes, which says that the consciousness that underpins ecosystems and earthquakes underpins human behaviors, and in this case, conflicts. But what that shows is that if we have a level of collective awareness that still appears in conflicts, then if we can evolve our collective level of awareness, we have an attractor that underpins peace.
This is fundamentally about choice.
It's fundamentally about choice, and it's fundamentally about our individuated awareness and consciousness that is collectively expressed in our behaviors, whether that's in our awareness or not, because obviously a lot of what our worldviews, are played out subliminally. They're not above the horizon of our awareness. They're just played out, in our behaviors, knee-jerk, sort of behaviors.
And so this is what's so lovely, is that actually you're now bringing everything that you've talked about regarding the cosmos and the shift in science. You're actually now really bringing it down to the individual, and it's about the need that we have now in this period of change that we're experiencing for the individual to actually be mindful of their choices, which is, and go on.
Mindful and heartful.
Yeah.
Because we know that the neuronal network, of our hearts is actually greater than the neural network of our brains. And of course, we are holograms ourselves in that regard. So we are a distributed, individuated, coherent intelligence. And we innately are receivers and transducers and radiators in relationship with the whole universe, whether we're aware of it or not. So every thought, every word, every action is part of that dynamic relationship. And of course, if we're coming from a perception of separation, then separation-based choices are natural, whether it be conflict, injustice, inequality, the sort of economic and money systems we have, governance systems, all of it. If it comes from a separation perspective, then they're natural. But just as conflict is a natural outcome of separation perception, then peace is a natural outcome and behavior of unitive awareness. So exactly that, it comes back to each and every one of us, and then how we are in the world with each other.
And how we are with our heartfelt view of self.
Yes, exactly. Which,
to me, it seems almost more significant for once we resonate with that heartfelt understanding of loving ourselves and understanding who we are, then we can move on in so many different ways.
Totally. And separation and the sort of what I call archetypal traumas, behaviors and traumas that come from it, like abandonment and abuse and betrayal and denial and rejection. We do them to others, they do them to us, we do them to ourselves. So exactly that, when we come into that perception and an experience of wholeness, in whatever way, rings our bell in that. And I mentioned ABBA earlier. Is dancing to ABBA does it for me. Being in the garden does it for me. Meditation, mindfulness, whatever it is, yoga, whatever it is, there are many, many, many pathways. And just to pick up on a point you made, though, this material and non-material, because that's still part of the old dualistic paradigm. My dear friend Elizabeth Sartoris talks about a cosmic piano keyboard where the lower notes are what we might call material and the higher notes are what we might call spiritual, but they're all notes on the same keyboard.
Right.
And we need to play the whole keyboard if we're to be in whole beingness, even beyond well-beingness, whole beingness of who we really are.
Right. So that's it. Put another way, that's about recognizing our humanness as well as our spiritual interdimensional aspect that is there as well. Okay, so let's just bring this back, focus in even more to perhaps the sort of person that's watching this discussion and having some penny drop moments, because I'm sure they will be. Dowsing. Let's bring it right down to ground. A really earthy thing, a basic thing, asking a yes/no question. Dowsing, although it's obviously so much more than that. To me, it's a doorway through to one's intuition, to one's inner universe. It can be quite a crude way of accessing the inner universe. Just as a kind of a parting thought, Jude, how would you sort of best, or what would you say to somebody that really has just sort of suddenly realised that they can do this weird thing with a rod or a pendulum? I mean, I know you know a lot about dowsing. It's not like this is something unusual for you at all. But they've suddenly discovered this, and it says, oh, their thought is, oh, the world's not what I thought it was, and Dr. Jude Currivan is now talking about this amazing process of which I'm a part. What would you say to them now? What's their next step? What should they do?
Well, I've worked with many dowsers, as you know, Tim, over the years, and I always rely on Hamish Miller's wisdom on this, because he realised, as you say, that dowsing was just opening a door to a much deeper adventure, but you can stop on that adventurous road whenever you choose to. So I find that a lot of dowsers are folks that have a very logical perspective on life. And so they're very much in this logical way of being and doing. And when they pick up a dowsing rod and realize they can ask a question and the dowsing rod responds, not from here, but essentially a bodily response, again, that's a penny drop moment for many. But to go beyond, and it's a wonderful thing to be doing, and it's a very grounding thing to be doing, and it's a very natural thing to be doing, because what it's doing is the rods are just the proxy for our own innate relationship and relatability, not just, with the world closely with us, but on what we call non-local levels. So map dowsing, you can do this remotely because, of course, we're innately connected, non-locally unified. So we have this innate ability. But I also hope that opening that door allows a deeper trust of what I think is our innate, our most fundamental innate superpower, which is our intuition. So sometimes to just, instead of asking yes/no questions, expand that, which dowsing of itself is not really a tool for, but to just put the dowsing rods down and open to a wider conversation with our innate intuition and the world around us, and see where that leads to, and then pick up the dowsing rods for very good and specific purposes.
Yeah, and I think that brings us rather neatly back round to your comment that you heard as you were doing your archaeological study and picking up bits of flint or whatever, the uniqueness of each aspect. I've forgotten what you said.
It was something like it was melding the extraordinary and the ordinary.
Yeah.
And the human and divine aspects of us, and realizing and experiencing the extraordinary in the ordinary, and without dishonoring in any way, appreciating the ordinariness of the extraordinariness of the cosmos and the whole world.